I'm Paul Harrington. I'm pastor at Holy Trinity in Adelaide, and this is Ben Chapman over here. Ben is someone who's on our team in Adelaide. He's come on board a little over 12 months ago. His background is in really senior management in different companies. Originally trained as an engineer, and Ben keeps telling me he wasn't any good as an engineer, so he moved into management. And he's been working for different companies, most recently BHP Billiton, and then I recruited Ben from there to help us drive a lot of our work on the ground in terms of church planting. So he's become our church planting director in Adelaide. What I'd love to do just to get going is to get an idea of where each of you sort of are from. I'll just give you a few different categories. I'm trying to work out who we're speaking to. So if you're in a mother church that would like to church plant, if that's your situation, just to give me an indication. Okay, so that's actually the bulk of us here. If you're a church planter who's hoping to take out a church plant from a mother church, so a couple of guys, excellent. If you're in the wrong seminar, maybe by now, this is the time to go. I think it covers most of us one way or another. That's what we're hoping to do today, to think about that sort of issue. It's been labelled a masterclass in church planting. Okay, now that wasn't our title. I'd say we're trying to work out what's going on really, each step at a time, and the masterclass implies we know what we're doing. So we'll spend about 5 minutes telling you everything we know, and then we'll open it up for questions. Well, we'll do a bit more than that. Let me give you some idea where we're heading, and that'll give you an idea of where to switch off and tap in. So first of all, we'll just briefly deal with church planting models, and the reason for that is because you hear a lot of labels around church planting models, and those labels change for the same model in different ways, so they're slightly interchangeable. Second thing we'll do is talk a little bit about the Trinity Network, only a little bit to give you context. It's not necessarily all that helpful to hear someone else and what they're doing, but it will help you get an idea of why we've done what we're doing, which helps you critique the stuff that we give you after that, okay? So we'll give you a sense of our context. Where we'll spend most of our time is looking at the mother-daughter church planting process. How many of you were here yesterday and some people are struggling with the doors? We locked them out. This is, now when they come in, everyone turn and look at them, okay? Okay, turn and look, right? Turn and look. Because they're late, That's good to see you. So the mother-daughter church planting process is what we'll spend a fair bit of time looking at, and then talk about some of the issues that came out of it. We'll hopefully have questions at the end. This is the sort of group where you can jump in at any stage and ask questions as we go along. And just depending on how we're travelling with time will be how much pause and stop we do along the way. So that's roughly where we're going. Let me talk briefly then about church planting models. There are a number of different models you can select. The way we chose it really was by accident. All right, we got to a point where we thought church planting was a good idea. We didn't know there were models, we just did it and worked it out as we went along. And because of our context, it sort of got directed for us in some ways because of our situation. A few of the models: parachute pioneer planting. That's the idea of having a planter, maybe a planter and his family, maybe another couple who step into a location. They don't have any resources, and they basically do all the work of connecting with a location and people, and try and grab enough people together over time to build a core team to actually plant. All right, so it's actually a really hard way to do it. You need to be extraordinarily gifted, I think, and particularly gifted in order to pull that off. Not much of that is done successfully within Australia, to be quite honest, and the failure rates on that in Australia are quite significant. There's the restart, relaunch, repotting sort of idea. You've got a church that's fallen on hard times, trying to reinvent themselves in some way, and often the way in which that is helped out is by another church stepping into that church situation with a core group to try and revitalise it in different ways. And there are a range of issues associated with that, trying to change the culture of an existing church with a new group, and in some ways I think that also is a difficult model to pull off unless it's engineered very carefully up front. There's the multi-site campus model. So Wade Burnett, how many of you heard Wade yesterday? Okay, so a few of us. Wade Burnett, who was just over here and just left, may be back shortly, but he is from the States, from an organisation that just consults in multi-siting over in the States. He is worth catching up with and having coffee with if that's what you want to do. Essentially a multi-site. The difference between a multi-site and a mother-daughter church plant is that multi-siting is a replication almost precisely of a mother church in another location, and the relationships are very strong, the governance is very strong, so you're doing the same thing on a number of sites. Not necessarily video teaching, but actually having the DNA of the mother church being replicated almost exactly, and accountability is all the way back to the mother church on a regular basis. So there's that sort of framework. Mother-daughter church planting is different in that it creates a more independent model of church. It may be replicating a core values DNA of the mother church, but not necessarily replicating all the systems and models and accountabilities associated with it. And often church planting can occur over a more diverse geographical area, whereas multi-siting tends to be a little more clustered. The statistics indicate that multi-siting generally tends to wane after 3 locations. Most people can't pull off more than 3 sites with multi-siting, whereas with church planting, the potential for doing that, of course, is endless in different ways, depending on how you cohere. The other one I've left out is the house or the cell church model. The idea here is missional home groups that often then do connect into a meeting sort of time, but the emphasis is on the small groups and them being the mission agencies to achieve what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so they're the fundamental ones. The ones that you don't want to do is the church split one. That is, you have congregations breaking apart and starting new ones. This is not a recommended strategy to follow, but sometimes does happen. One thing I should say about the Trinity Network is, having sat in on Wade's session yesterday, we are a mother-daughter church planting model with multi-site elements, and so I'm still trying to work that one out, but that's okay. You can think it through. Let me give you a brief history of Trinity, and it will be brief just because I want to set a context. The mother church in Trinity City was established 1836, so the UK settlers came on a boat, they landed, the chaplain on that boat came into town, set up sailcloth, Trinity City. That was our mother church. 2 years later a building was built, and it's existed basically, that mother church in that building till today. Up until the mid-1900s, Trinity struggled to survive. Right, so they tried to sell the property at different points, lean times, small congregations really did battle. And then it was post-World War II, and that sort of boom time for churches that Rory was talking about last night, the 50s into about 1960, that Trinity grew very, very rapidly and became a substantial church. What happened was, you can see it on the graph of attendance, we got to roughly 800 people on that site, and that was the ceiling for the property. Right? So that was basically, we were bouncing off the walls at that point, multiple congregations, limited parking, limited kids facilities, limited, that was just it. And then 1963 happened, I hadn't quite worked it out before, and we had this taper in 1963, along with the rest of Christendom around the world apparently, and that's what occurred. But essentially we stayed fullish for the next 30 or so years. When I joined the staff team in the late 80s and became the senior pastor in 1993, and the issue we were trying to work through was, we could just stay comfortable and full, or we could think about what we're going to do to reach the city with the gospel. And how would we do that? So do we build a bigger barn, a bigger building, and try and leverage off that into the city? But in the end, we thought probably church planting was a smarter way to go, to actually take the gospel out with groups around the city and to expand in that sort of direction. Adelaide is known as a 20-minute city. The theory is you can get anywhere in Adelaide in 20 minutes, a concentric city. So we had people spread all around the city as a regional church. In fact, we had people travelling for up to 30 minutes to get into church on a Sunday morning. And we figured that if we planted on that 20-minute ring, we would then be able to reach beyond that further into the city if we did that and we were church planting. We had about half our people travelling more than 15 minutes, half less than 15 minutes. So it just seemed smart to do it that way. But as I say, we didn't really have much idea at all what we were doing. Not like less than not much. We were really struggling to work this one out, okay? The reality was the city church had been sort of foolish for about 30 years, so we were just a bit fat and content, It was nice, and and not much evangelism had been happening a bit, because sometimes people would go and we'd have to replenish them. It was just that once you're full, you're full. And it was just that sort of situation. But we wanted to reach Adelaide and South Australia with the gospel. In 2 Thessalonians 3, how Paul asked for prayer that the word of the Lord might spread rapidly. We thought we would love to see the word of the Lord spreading rapidly throughout our city and our state. How would we contribute towards that? How could we be a part of that? What happened was we spent about 5 years in the 1990s re-educating people on the thought of church planting. So when I first started talking about church planting, most people said, why would we do that? Why would we do that? We've never done that before. Why would we do it now? It was that sort of idea. So the re-education about the need was there. In 1999, we started a new service on our campus. What we wanted to do was to split one of our evening congregation into two and try the idea of reaching a group of workers more deliberately with a missional core group. And the reason for doing that, and we signalled the reason for doing that, was in order to then plant off-site. So it was the first stage in trying to do that next step, to prepare people in that direction. So that's what we tackled. And then in 2001, we planted our first church. Now, let me just underline a point here. Nothing happened quickly. Right? It happened really slowly. And for me, it felt agonisingly slow, right? Agonisingly slow. But what I've observed and learnt, if you don't take anything else out of today's session, is that I think in Australia, we go from concept of church planting to launching in way too small a period, right? We actually concertina that process way too much, and so we give birth to churches in a premature way. And the failure rate with church planting in Australia, mother, daughter, any sort, normally is the casualty rate is way too high, and I think the reason for that is because we rushed the process way too much. Okay? So I would underline this, Ben will underline this, we'll say it 6 or 7 times because we think you're thick, all right? No, we don't think that, but it just needs to be emphasised, okay? That work out how long it's going to take and then triple the time and go from there, okay? Because you just need to do it well. Yep. Yeah. You really want to push the system quicker to get somewhere. Yeah. Context in Adelaide, the Anglican Church, of which I'm notionally a part, is very liberal. Okay, so we're evangelical. Maybe 10% of the Anglican churches in Adelaide would count themselves as Bible teaching churches, evangelical. And so one of our strategies with church planting was to put pressure on the denomination. That's a secondary goal. That is, we want to reach all of Adelaide with the gospel. That's the goal. And they're not all, do you know what I mean? The denomination should change as a part of that, but it's an incidental part of that. So we actually did with this model step outside. We stayed within, but it was tense, the denomination, in order to put the denomination under pressure. So we're much more like almost an independent Anglican church that started doing this. But 15 years later, we're partnering with lots of people now as we do it in terms of advice and resource and that sort of stuff. Yeah. The answer to that question will change in different locations, I reckon. Yeah. Let me whip through what's happened to date. 2001, we planted a church called Trinity Hills, sent out about 80 or 90 people. Depends on who you talk to, the planter or the sending church, you know. The sending church always sends out more than the planter thinks he took, you know, and it's just a rule of thumb. So I said, this is right, isn't it, Mike? You know, Mike's one of our planters. He got an accurate number. 2006, the city fronted up again and planted at Trinity Bay. 2010, we planted a church at the northeast of the city. Then a week later, Trinity Mount Barker was planted from our first church plant in 2001. So this was a granddaughter church plant. We're pretty excited about that. 2013, Trinity Inner South was planted from Trinity City. In 2015, we planted Trinity South Coast. That's about 90 minutes travel time from the city, and that largely came from Trinity Mount Barker. So we had a great-granddaughter church that they started up. In 2016, Mike, who's just over here, planted a church at Trinity called Trinity Grove from Trinity Northeast, so another granddaughter plant. So that's basically the pattern of what's occurred to date. At the moment, we have 3 church planters or church planting residents in the wings who are planning to plant from next year and beyond. 2 of these are going to come from daughter churches and plant granddaughter churches. And then the third is our first cross-cultural church or language church. It's a Mandarin church that we're starting hopefully next year, the beginning of next year. That's the plan. We haven't announced the time because we want to get it right rather than, get it fast. That's the idea. So the frameworks we're operating with in terms of... Yep. Yeah.
With the daughter and granddaughter churches, is it as neat as that, or is there involvement potentially from some of the other churches?
To date, it's been almost as neat as that. So Mike's church, Trinity Grove, took largely the core group from Trinity Northeast, which was the church he was working in, and a few people from Trinity City who happened to be out in that area. Dominantly, though, the daughter church, planting granddaughter. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So what's interesting is, and the reason this is useful, and Ben will put the stats up a bit later on, is some of you may be thinking, all very well, Mother Church, 800 people, naturally church planting is easy. If I had that many, I'd be doing more church plants than you, you may be thinking that way. But our daughter churches have been more in the 200 area, and they're planting, and we're tackling that. Okay, so wherever you lock into this equation, hopefully there'll be things to pick up in that sort of process as you go. Yeah. No, I'm not sure. It's varied a bit, but it's normally a global number, is that right? Yeah, adults and kids. It's varied a bit from place to place. Trinity Hills, when they planted, was probably more 280 adults and kids. Trinity Northeast, when they planted the Grove, was probably more 180 adults. Yeah, so it was a smaller group. It's varied a bit, yep. We will get to this, but the core group numbers we've generally been working on are the sort of 40 to 80 sort of area as a core group for sending, even from the churches that are the daughter churches that are not as big. So we're talking, in that instance, maybe 20% of the Trinity North East that planted at the Grove. Is that a fair number, Mike? So it's about, yeah, out of 170 or so. Yeah, so it's a bit. Oh, okay, yeah, look, size for the mother church to be ready to go. I think 200 is the sort of number that's healthy to have. So Grove was probably planted off what we would regard as too small a base. It's going really well. So 12 months later, they're, doubled in size, close to 100, in terms of regular meeting. Yep. Yeah, that's certainly one of the factors, but there's also a numbers factor. So we have a big church launch and there's 7 of us there. We're incredibly mature, but it doesn't feel like, because 3 of them are in the band and one's on the door and no one's actually sitting, you need a certain number to actually roll, I think, yeah. Yep, last question, then I probably should keep going, yeah.
Well, will you address the merits or not of the sort of same branding of independent churches having names?
Yeah, branding, common, no, I'm not going to do that, but ask that question again if we have time, okay? Or over lunch or whatever. Let me press on. The church planting framework we operated with was 20-minute ring. Would have actually been easy to plant within that in Adelaide, given our group, but we wanted to push. We're thinking, how do we reach the city with the gospel? So we wanted to push out beyond that. We wanted to be networked, not independent. My read on independent church planting in Australia was that it has a life cycle, the failure rate with independent planting, boom, first crisis, bust. Okay, networking, I think, helpfully cushions some of that, supports the planters, stops them, crashing and burning, lots of reasons. So network, evangelistically driven. We weren't trying to just move people around the bases. And we wanted to have church plants that planted churches. That was, from the outset, that's what we said. We want to plant churches that reproduce and plant churches. We're starting to see some of that happen in our network. We're hoping it will happen more. When we launch, at the launch days, we always pray that this church will have the privilege of planting another church. Rough to say. Yep. Yep, so it's all those things in a way. The governance thing I could spell out in more detail, but we have a board and we have leadership teams in churches. So the board is for the network, leadership teams, we provide admin, organisational resourcing. I coach, Ben supports in terms of his role. We have a business manager who operates a lot of these support frameworks. We do some graphic design work centrally as well. We're still working it out, and hopefully we get more resourcing between them as well.
And
yeah.
Those factors lead to decrease of the church plan smashing up at the end.
I think they're all factors in it. Yeah, I'll pass over to Ben. Yeah.
So that was 3 minutes of Trinity Network history over 180 years, so there's a lot of detail there, I appreciate. What we've put together now is a set of steps, or we've called them waypoints in the mother and daughter church planting process. So a waypoint, for those who aren't familiar, is a navigational term. So it's a marker or a signpost on the way to a destination, and it can be a point where you stop and reassess how you're going, which I think is quite applicable to church planting. Now there's a logic in this order that we're going to put up, but it's probably worth noting that there's a level of chaos that happens behind that. A lot of things happen in parallel, a lot of things are overlapping, so while it looks linear, don't be fooled that it is purely linear. So the waypoints are, and I'll quickly run them, and we'll spend the bulk of our time going through the detail of these. Developing the heart and the head, so that's the motivation, the reasons behind doing a church plant. The big picture, so developing a vision, capturing a vision, and sharing a vision. The healthy mother church, so the health of a mother church is critical. if your mother church is unhealthy and you plant, not only do you risk having an unhealthy daughter church, you can exacerbate the health problems in your mother church. So we'll go through a bit of detail around that. Identifying the mission field. So these are the practical steps in the strategic planning of locating where you're going to go. Recruiting a church planter. So a critical step, obviously getting the right person onto your team to lead the church plant. The gathering of a core team. So who goes, who stays, how many. We'll go through a bit of detail around that. The detailed planning. So as Paul kind of said, I think there's two approaches to detailed planning. Either you don't do it, or you do it and you leave everything else before it out. So the lesson here is we think take your time and make sure you do the detailed planning with everything that precludes it. Then the launch and evaluation. So if you're ever planning on planting again, make sure you're checking, well, what did we do? What did we learn? What can we get better from? So we'll stop for questions along the way as we go through, but they're the waypoints. So we'll start with the developing of the head and the heart, and I'm going to take a lot of this as assumed knowledge if you're here at a church planting conference. Rory talked a little bit about this kind of stuff last night, but Australia, fastest growing Western nation in the last 100 years, population of over 24 million, and in terms of net population growth in Australia, so either through birth or migration, one person every 1 minute and 22 seconds. So we're not the fastest growing in terms of number, but that's still growing fairly quickly. And if you look at Australians identifying as Christians, the dominant religion is becoming no religion. And Australians who attend church once a month, which we wouldn't necessarily call regular, still 9 out of 10 people aren't. So at the end of the day, heaven and hell hangs in the balance for these 9 out of 10 people. And not only do we need more churches, but we need to have healthy churches, church planting, and we need to be multiplying the number of churches we've got if we're ever going to make a dent in those 9 out of 10 people. And at the end of the day, it's Jesus' mission, not ours. So church planting is a gospel enterprise, so it should be done for gospel convictions. Therefore, because it is so important, we owe it to get ourselves ready to be able to church plant. So in some of the corporate environments I've worked in, there's this professional development framework called the 3 E's. I like it because it's simple and it's really easy to remember. The 3 E's are education, exposure and experience. So it's a good example is if I go and study a management degree, that doesn't automatically qualify me to be a manager or a leader of people. So you need to also get exposure to what it's like managing an organisation or people and experience doing it. So in a church planting context, education would be things like Multiply here, church planting intensives, a lot of literature has been written about that. Exposure is meeting with other church planters, going to church plants, asking questions about how other people have done it. And the experience, I think all too often we do lack this, is trying to start something new. So how many of you have actually started something new? How many of you have managed a project? The skills you learn from that are vital. So that's developing the head and the heart.
Big picture stuff, the idea of vision. Can I say in some ways I get totally confused at points by vision, strategy, goals, blah, 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 blah. You know, like it all just sort of rolls around in my head. I can never get my head around it. The other thing is I have a reaction to talking about vision in a Christian context. It not really felt right in some ways. And it was crystallised for me one time. We had a month where we were talking about our vision as a church and, you know, preaching on it and talking about plans and things like that. And one of our long-term thinking sort of guys, professor of history, came up to me afterwards and he said, is I really don't like this language about vision, because it seems to me we're using vision in a way the Bible never uses it. He said, I much prefer if you just said, here is our thoughts on where we'd like to go for the future, plans, and we hope you'll pay for it month, And I thought, it's not crisp, but it's accurate, that sort of idea. So vision, I think when we're looking at the Bible, is God's vision for his world and people. And what we're trying to do is to articulate plans that are attached to that in some way, that articulate what God is doing in his world. All right. So if you just assume I know that as we go through some of this stuff, that's quite useful. Having said that, having a big picture, a sense of where you're going as a church that is bigger and beyond who you are, seems to me to be biblical. That is, God has a big plan for his world, and we are his people, and we're to share his plan. And then part of the task is to then articulate that for your particular context. For us, reasonably big CBD church, Adelaide's a concentric city. Everything comes into town. We have the highest population of students who study in the city of any city in Australia. We have the highest percentage of people who work in the city of anywhere in Australia. We have the highest percentage of people who come into the city every week, right? And we're in the city. So thinking about the whole of Adelaide and South Australia in that context made a lot of sense. So we started talking about how we as a church could contribute in reaching our city and state for the Lord Jesus so he might be glorified. And it made sense to us, among other things, to think about an approach to church planting that actually helped us export people from our overcrowded site so that they might do evangelism and we might create space to do more evangelism. All right, that sort of idea. That was the sort of big sort of building bricks. We then had to capture that vision, because unless you can somehow get that down to particular plans, then you're in trouble. And you need to do this in a layered way. You obviously need to do it with your key staff, your key leaders, your key ministry partners as you think it through before you then take that into a congregational sort of context. You then need to be regularly sharing the vision. Okay, so from 1994 until we planted our first church in 2001, I had to regularly talk about and convince people that church planting was a good idea, even though we'd never done it before. And actually not many people in Australia had done much of this before either. So it was that sort of context, and it took consistent communication. Now, I personally am not wired to do that, right? Once I've told you an idea, I have another one, and I'd like to talk about that instead, and to keep coming back to the same idea again and again, right? This is why I have grey hair, I'm only 33, but it just was hard work. But you need to keep doing it in creative ways, but beating that sort of drum. Now, if you do that, you're on the right track when people start asking a whole series of questions about what's going on. So when I talked in theory about planting churches, people would nod, right? So at that stage, I was in my mid-30s, and people go, that's nice. The young pastor has a nice idea, Isn't that lovely, right? And then when we said we're going to do it, they said, the nice pastor isn't just got ideas, he's got plans to do something, right? We have to think about this now, Now, they're all friends. I was very much a part of this church. But it actually got put on the line at that point. So, there's already enough churches. And the reality is there's not even enough church buildings, let alone enough churches. You look at any suburb in your neck of the woods, add up the number of church buildings that are there, fill them to capacity twice on a Sunday, and you've reached 5% of the population in that neighbourhood. Nowhere near enough churches. Right? It's a bizarre thought to think we have too many churches. Now, we don't have healthy churches, but even if they were healthy, we still wouldn't have enough. We just need to stack more, We can't afford it as a church to do it. Of course we can't, but it's not ours anyway. Like, the affording is God's job. He's the banker and he's the people supplier. We actually need to think in those sort of terms, recalibrate our thinking along those lines. This will mean we have to change. Yes, That's true, right? Our pastor's gone crazy. I've already talked about that. All sorts of questions will keep getting repeated. Now, let me say, most of those questions are real. Like, they're not just blockers. They are real issues that you need to deal with as a pastor, understand, and tackle in a systematic sort of way. And I don't think it gets easier as you go on, because people are getting stretched. We now have people, say, at our Trinity City location who've lived through 4 plants in 12 years. Right? And the pastor of the main congregation that's provided is looking slightly tired. It is so hard to keep giving and giving and giving, and the people, their relationships are changing. Sending, welcoming, sending, welcoming, sending, stepping up into new roles, sending, stepping up, it is hard work. But of course, that's exactly what you want to do, isn't it? Like, we're all about the gospel going out and people coming into the kingdom, so we pay the price. But you need to be able to articulate that. Let me just show you a graph on the bounce back factor. Now, this will be particularly helpful, I think, for pastors in mother churches thinking about planting. Because normally there are 2 fears that operate when you're doing this. One is we send people, will we have enough people to do what we want to do? We send people and they take their money with them, right? They don't normally leave that behind, even though you could ask them to do that. That is, so your mother church is a fear in that way. What this shows you is the bounce back factor when it comes to both numbers and finance. This is Trinity City, so it's a larger church context, but actually our daughter churches that are planted would show the same sort of recovery process, all right? Good to know if you're healthy and you do this, people jump into it because of the gospel convictions that underlie it as well. So year 1, this is based on the principle that we send 10% of our people, but what you see in the first year, for example, is that we're only 1.5% down on attendance, even though we sent 10% of the people. Isn't that interesting? Now, the reason is because as you get on with gospel planting practice, people grow in health. They grow in opportunity because there are more seats. They are thinking, we're reaching out with the gospel, and we're reaching out with the gospel as the mother church, right? It just builds in gospel robustness and health. Financially, we've done even better than that. So send 10% of your people. Remember, you're sending 10% of your most motivated, keen, generous people. So you're sending more than 10% of your budget. Normally, you probably send 20%, right? But notice, year 1, just a smidgen, in year 0, like basically at the start point, only a smidgen below what you had previously, and then by year 1, back in front, and by year 2, in front further on finance than you are on numbers. And Ben's actually regulated this to pull out the CPI factors, so we've got dollar for dollar 15 years apart. Okay, it's a regular sort of figure, if that makes sense. What I'm saying is the bounce back factor from a healthy church base, you can do it and not fear that you're going to die in the process. It's a risk. Do you know what I mean? It's a risk that you could hit severe problems, but be encouraged that as you get on with gospel activity, God generously does provide and stir hearts and minds. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So if we showed you the chart, we haven't got as much data on our daughters planting, but if we showed you the data on, say, Mike's church, so Trinity Grove, they take 15 to 20% of the people, and that church now has grown by, it doubled in 12 months size-wise. Their budget, God has wonderfully provided there. Go back to the home church. Home church is now the same size it was when it planted 12 months later, and they're further in front on budget than where they were when they planted. Okay, so that's 12 months ago. So we're seeing that same pattern repeated in our daughter churches of 180 to 200, not just the mother church where you'd expect there's a lot of money flying around. And that area, that they're planted from and into is not, it's a very middle sort of area rather than a wealthy area. It's not full of white collar professionals bankrolling stuff. Yeah.
When you're saying, or you were saying about 10%, can you just give me an idea on more recent times how many people that actually is, and how does that connect with?
Yeah. Ben will actually cover those stats really well in just a few moments. I'll hand over to Ben.
So the third waypoint in the process is obviously growing the health of your mother church. So we've developed, I suppose, the saying over time in the Trinity Network that we'll only plant a church if we end up with 2 healthy churches at the end. So the question is, I suppose, how do we make sure that there's a healthy mother church? This diagram here, simplistic, but tries to demonstrate the point that when you church plant, you want to be church planting when the momentum is on the rise. So however you measure that, be it attendance, the number of leaders you have, whatever it is, you want to be planting when momentum is increasing. You don't want to be planting when things are decreasing, because if you then change something, you take leaders out, you whatever it might be that you're measuring, you can just exacerbate that fall. Now we know that from fact because we've done that a few times where we've planted when we've been on the downward side of the curve, and it gets a lot harder, and there's a lot more effort taken to arrest and repair the mother church. So a healthy church is a growing church. So growth is an overall indicator of the health of your church, but it isn't just because your church is growing doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. What you need to work out in your context is, what does a healthy church look like? Then, and this is where some of you might start feeling uncomfortable, then you actually have to measure that, and you have to get the discipline in to actually record that and track it and look for trends. So let me quickly talk you through in the Trinity Network what we measure. So for all our centres, so this is across the 8 churches, we measure how many people attend on a Sunday, how many visitors and newcomers we've got, how often our regulars attend, who attends home groups, what's the welcoming and integration process, or the integration ratio, so how many visitors do we get to members that join, financial partnership, how many people are serving, the front door, back door, so where are people coming from? Are they coming from a church down the road? Are they being converted? Why are people leaving and where are they going? The depth of leadership, so if you plant a church, you're going to need to have twice as many leaders, so we make sure we're tracking that. And then the personal spiritual disciplines, which is a little bit of a work in progress, that's a little bit harder to measure. So if you don't mind, hands up who tracks gathering attendance on a Sunday. Okay, and how many of you track individuals? Great. So there's no reason why you can't probably get 50% of this straight away. If you have a system like Elvanto or CCB, there's several other ones out there, you can quite easily generate data like that. The key is in the individual attendance. That's what actually gives you the most meaningful data. So there's a couple of important points around education in using these kind of data. So first of all, don't publicly distribute it amongst your church. That probably doesn't help. Don't go up to a newcomer on a Sunday morning and say, hey, we're tracking you. There's not much to be gained from that. So keep it to your leadership team. The other point, I suppose, is it's not a decision-making tool. Sometimes people, they get data and they think, well, that's going to make the decisions for me. No, it's not going to make the decisions for you. It's just going to educate you and give you a better, another reference point. And the third one is the frequency at which you do it. So probably the best analogy is if I look at the BHP share price daily, I'm on an emotional roller coaster up and down. If I look at it monthly, I can actually start to see trends. Same with church data. You might record it weekly, but it might not be that helpful to look at it weekly. Maybe looking at it monthly is important. So, and the final point there is then it's less about what the absolute number is, and what you're really looking for is trends. So an example of that, this is one of our churches in our network. So we, as I said, measure the number of newcomers that attend a church on a Sunday. And when you pair that with the gathering attendance, you can start to take some interesting insights out of it. So the first one is, see if this works. Yeah, so January, lots of visitors attend church. But actually gathering attendance is down. So what that's saying to me is a lot of our regulars go away. And in fact, a lot of our pastors have holidays in January. Yet we've got a lot of people checking out church. So that's a great reason to build your welcoming and integration teams up over January. And if you're a pastor and you're taking leave, that's fine, but make sure there's people there to follow on the welcoming and integration. This is a pretty common picture in Adelaide of attendance over the year. So we've got probably almost 100 church years of data that we can look at. So typically January, February, March, April, big months, everyone's happy. Weather starts getting cold, everyone goes into hibernation, the world's coming to an end. Not many people coming to church. And then it kind of recovers towards the back end of the year. In this example here, this church actually deliberately did a evangelistic driven series and a series of events around August to try and pull people out of hibernation and get them back into church. And you can see the momentum that actually built along the way. The other point for us as a network is we have the ability, and so if you have multiple church plants, of actually comparing that data. So this is a range. So we've got a church in the network that has close to 18% visitors every Sunday. We also have a church that is as low as probably about 4%, and that's the average of the network. So by having this data, we can actually go to the church that's churches that are towards the top and find out what they're doing and pass that information on to other churches. So I'll stop for questions there because I know I've raced through a fair bit. Yes? Yes. How are we tracking individual attendance? So two ways. We have a system. So we use a system called CCB, Church Community Builder, that has a role in it. And on a Monday morning, the pastors and admin team go in and check off who was there at church. You can also do it in the church service with an iPad. The key is having a role and an accurate list of people that attend your church. Yep. Any other questions about that? All right. Identifying the mission field. Okay. So we've covered the reasons why you're church planting, the vision of church planting is shared, everybody's on board, your mother church is healthy, so where are you going to plant? So this is quite a strategic step that you need to go in. Can I say some people skip this step because they've got a building or they've got an idea of where they want to go, something that's available. Can I just really encourage you to do this step anyway? There's a lot of value to be gained by actually doing a comparison so you know what you're getting. So in doing this, probably the easiest way to explain it is there's hard indicators and soft indicators. So the hard indicators that we use are the demographic resources that are available. So if you look at websites like the ID community, I'm sure you're familiar with that, all the census data is available at a really quite a low level of detail. It's published graphically and everything, so that's a great resource. That's going to be updated in the next couple of months with all the 2016 census data. Local government development plans. Every year councils produce infrastructure plans and everything. That'll give you a bit of an indication of where they're investing their money and what they're wanting to see in the local community. And corporate development plans. So I spent the last 5 years writing these things, so I know how much modelling and effort and work goes into developing these corporate plans. Companies like West Farmers, who own Coles and Bunnings and those guys, Stocklands, I said Westfield, those kind of companies, go and have a look at their corporate development plans for the areas that you're living in. If they're deciding to build and invest in particular areas, there's a reason behind that. That can be a really great indicator of future development in your area as well. The other one that we use, and the benefit of a system like CCB, is the picture at the bottom there, household mapping. So we can push of a button, determine where everybody lives who's on our roll. That's really helpful for not just church planting activities, but also home group ministries and all those kind of things. Yes. Yeah. So the soft indicators, talking with people in the local area, going down to the coffee shop and talking to the local business owners. They are often really in touch with what's going on in the community. And the other one we found is school principals. They're really well connected with what's going on in the area. And more often than not, that can generate a discussion around potential venues as well. There's a value in having multiple options, even if you've got a potential venue that you're thinking of going to. I'd encourage you to actually have something to compare that to, because it really makes you understand what the difference and the reasons, the particularities of where you're planning on going. Doing this before you recruit a church planter, this is how we do it, really helps us develop and hone the type of skills, the type of person that we're looking for as a church planter. And more and more getting leadership teams and people involved in developing these missional plans means there's buy-in from very early on. Cool.
Can I ask you a question there?
Sure.
When you say you're doing that early in order to work out type of plan, what variation do you see in the type of plan you're after compared to where the area is?
Yeah, so I mean Adelaide, probably like most suburbs, has different demographics. So out where Mike is, he's kind of on the border of the middle class to the lower socioeconomic areas. So if we were to be going into a low socioeconomic area, that may change the type of person that we want. We try not to send doctors, 40 doctors into an area where there's no doctors type thing. Sure.
I have a question about Atlanta.
Sure.
Do you tend to raise them all up from within Trinity, or are you happy to get them from another source? And
Yep.
so, what's the source?
Cool. Yep, both. Both. So Paul's going to talk about that now, actually, recruitment of a church planter. So the answer is yes, we bring people in externally, but we more and more are starting to raise up guys internally.
The recruitment of church planters, this really is a critical area, and humanly speaking, the right leader or the right household leading a church plant is probably, I think, the biggest human decision about the health or effectiveness of your church planting exercise. So it's worth spending a lot of time on. The process of doing our research on locations and church planter is quite iterative. They both come together. So we varied locations where we've planted based on a planter we've recruited and matching them to an area. And we've also identified areas and then looked for the right planter to fit into those areas. So Mike, we recruited out to Trinity North East. We weren't quite sure where he'd plant, but we knew he could plant in a few different spots. Mike then did the research actually while he was on board with our team, working out where he might plant, and particularly looked at 3 areas, narrowed it down to 2, and then isolated it down to 1. So Mike actually came on board as a planter and did that research, which is slightly different to the pattern that we've had. So the process really does gel together, but what we're trying to do is get in front on the pattern to work out areas where it makes sense for us to plant based on largely where we already have people located, and then trying to think about recruiting people that might be able to lead out in those areas. So we're doing a bit of that sort of stuff. When we're recruiting from within, we know people for years and years and years and years. Right? They might have been converted at Trinity, discipled at Trinity, gone to a local college or an in-state college, but we've kept in contact, we've got them back on board. It's easy to know them. But even in those situations, we still get those people assessed. We go through the Geneva sort of process and we're quite rigorous. And then we would spend more time on our own sort of internal assessing than we do in the Geneva assessment process. So we really want to know people who are planting and know them well in that sort of idea. So if we're recruiting from outside, someone like Mike, for example, we had a contact with him at a conference here in Sydney on one occasion. We came back and inserted ourselves into his household for hours and hours and hours to see how that clicked. We got them across to Adelaide to put them in all sorts of pressured situations before we recruited them. We smiled the whole time, but, we put under pressure, and there was a lot of time invested in just getting to know the Sam's household before we brought them on board. And I would spend more time on that aspect of our church planting phases almost than anything else, because a lot rests on having the right people leading your churches. Once you've got your church planter in place, though, let me say, having clarity with your planter, your mother church pastor and your daughter church planter about the nature of the way in which those two are going to function together, the process leading to the plant and the relationship post-plant is really critical. The first time we planted, I planted with a good friend, he sent him out with a group of people, and we just knew it was all going to be fine. We just knew it would all be fine. And it sort of was quite a lot of the time, But then we'd hit up against different issues that I had a very clear idea that he had a very clear idea on, and he didn't, And it was because we didn't spend enough time talking about the accountabilities, the responsibilities, the reporting processes, the finances, all those sorts of questions. We actually hadn't done that hard work of nailing that down up front and getting clarity around it. So let me say, make sure you do that. Otherwise you'll trade on your relationship. You'll think friendship will get you there. And at the end of the day, you won't be very good friends because you didn't get clarity around that sort of stuff. Yep.
Just in terms of that kind of investment, so you're going to get, 50, 60 hours a week to work max.
Yep.
Is a lot of your time spent on overseeing the network, investing in the planters, recruiting the next guy, or just the sheer workload of that, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so progressively I'm moving more into a network role than a local church pastor role. So technically I'm still the senior pastor of Trinity City, which is the original mother church, the larger church in the city. But I have a senior pastor who works with me who does most of the work in that sort of context, which is really helpful. And then I would 6 months of the year preach outside of that church and 5 months of the year preach in that church. So I'm straddling. The reason I've stayed based in a church is I'm not sure I'd function if I wasn't. I think I need to be connected to on-the-ground ministry in a more consistent sort of way. So that's the reason I've done that, yeah. So quite a lot of my time goes into network things, connecting with pastors, that sort of stuff. Yep.
Do you want to keep going?
No, it's okay.
And do you, again, just hearing that the value add of sharing resources horizontally and even that data stuff, you were saying, that church can tell that church that here's a resource that gets you through that thing. So, and I'm being quite concrete, physically, where does that happen? Do you guys get together once a month, once a week, once a year? Do you chair that meeting? What does the schedule look like?
So our senior pastors, along with Ben and our business manager, get together once a month for half a day. We go away for 3 days a year, once a year, and then we tend to have catch-ups on top of that on a more one-on-one sort of basis, and that can vary maybe once every 2 or 3 months, or when issues arise or occasions, and then there's sort of incidental stuff around that. Yeah.
Half a day once a month?
Half a day once a month. Yep.
And that's quite global. That's sort of how's it going there?
Yeah. What's happened is with Ben coming on board, we've got a much better idea what's going on. So Ben has actually done a lot of work of explaining what's been happening. I could explain it, but it would sort of feel like this, and Ben's explaining it like this. So he's actually, there's an accountability I now have because I can say, no, that's not right, but it actually is, and so it's helpful for all of us, for all our church plants, because they can go, okay, that's reality. And over here, we're seeing this church doing great work on its evangelism, and over here, we've got very low newcomer numbers. Over here, our discipleship processes are brilliant. Do you know what I mean? But now we can identify that, and I think we'll be able to utilise that much more effectively because of that. Yeah. Let me just move on and talk about, church planner recruitment, critical. And the other thing I'd say is, only work with people you like working with if you're going to work with them. It took me a while to work that out, but I now only recruit people I think I'm going to enjoy, as well as they're good, because life's just too short. Ben, yes, I hired Ben very recently. No, seriously, I work very closely with Ben, and I wasn't going to hire someone who was a data-driven person when I'm not, if he was going to drive me nuts. I've worked with people in the past who've been very data-driven. I was on a leadership team with a guy very data-driven, and every question had to be answered with a paper with statistics. And I'd say, we don't need to do that. I can tell you the answer now. No, I don't know what the answer is until I see the stats. I said, but I'm telling you what the answer is already. I know it, I could go away and write a paper and waste a day on it, but just take my word for it, And, but you see, I wasn't right. He wasn't right. But it was just incredibly frustrating because he required so much of that. Now, Ben does that for me. It's wonderful. That is... Ben has the right understanding of the way in which the data serves the organisation, and he's got the right personality for me to work closely with, so that's great. Mike. I knew when I met Mike and Jen and their family, I thought, I would love having these guys in the network as part of our extended family of churches, and everything I've seen of them just bears it out. It's wonderful. I actually think there's a value in that when you're working closely with people. You can't just trade on it, but it's helpful, so, yeah.
Well, if you had someone who thanked the church under you guys, and then a few years down the track you realise that their ministry practice isn't necessarily wrong, but it doesn't line up with yours, and you're just butting in a lot, do you have it in your memorandum of understanding to cut and dry instead of go, as a church, or is it that tight a memorandum that you just pull them in the light? What do you do with
Yeah.
the contract?
We haven't had any churches where that's happened, and I am optimistic in terms of thinking most things we can work through and work to a better solution. But I've also talked to our board and said, look, at some stage we're going to plant a church, and for whatever reason there's going to be tension there, and they will want to break away and do their own thing. And at that point, if we think it's going to be healthy for them to do that, then we'll say, go with our blessing. Life's too short to keep fighting. If we think they'll break away and it'll be a disaster because the pastor has issues to do with his maturity as a leader and is very egocentric, I'll fight that to the death. Right? Because I'm not going to trash a congregation on the ego of a pastor. Now, hopefully I've done the recruiting so that doesn't happen, but I'll always be thinking the health of that church, and if I think it could be healthy in an ongoing way not being in our network, that's okay. If it's not going to be, no way will I allow that to happen if I have any ability to stop it. Yeah. So that gives you some idea of where I'm coming from. Yeah. Do you think it's fair, Mike? Yeah. That's the sort of way in which we work. Yeah. Let me talk, just move on. Just want to make sure and we will, if we've got time, we'll hang around and we'll have questions and that'll be fine. Gathering the core team. So this is the next sort of waypoint. Once you've got the church planting, you've got an idea where you're going, you need to get a core team together. Let me just quickly tell you my terms here, because again, terms are used quite differently. With core team, I'm talking about the tight group of people that essentially form the basis of leadership, particularly for the first 100 days to a year, okay? Because often the core startup group is very hands-on in the way they function, and an ongoing leadership team might evolve in a slightly different way once you've done that first phase. So that's sort of core team. the starter team, I'm talking about the wider group of people around that core group who are involved pretty well from the outset, but aren't necessarily the leaders. They're more the ministry partner type people on the ground. And then you've got the others. The others. They're really the group that sort of get on board at some point, sometimes close to when you launch, around the launch time, early on, but haven't necessarily been for the ride all the way along in terms of getting there. When you're gathering the core team together, you need to have a team that complement your pastor. That is, one of the things I'm looking for primarily in one of my church planters is that they know who they are. They need a certain number of gifts, but if they have good self-understanding and they're comfortable with that, then what they'll do is they'll build people around them who complement. They'll know how to build a team that's balanced and helpful. And it has taken me a while to work out that is a really critical quality. That the pastor doesn't need to be the most gifted man in all the world in every area, but he does need to know where his strengths are and who else he needs to work alongside and be really comfortable to enable them to achieve on this team. Okay, so self-awareness is really critical. When you're recruiting people into the team, you need to have the right mix of people based on where you're going to plant. Do you want 12 people on your team who are retirees when you're trying to reach young families? Probably not. You need to have some sense of the team reflecting the group you're trying to connect with. It needs to be big enough to do some of the heavy lifting around planting. So, we've heard a couple of guys say, came out of college, just got married, started a church, and I think they've said this has been really hard work and not necessarily the way I would have, came out of college, boom, church plant, and I think that we've probably got to be wise enough to think through how you gather this team over time, how you get to know each other well, how you hold common vision together about what you're trying to do, how you allocate particular responsibilities, how you work out your initial systems of evangelism and welcoming and integration, have things in the plan, on the ground, planned out, who's going to lead the children's ministry, like those sort of things as much as you can up front. Because from day one when you launch, you have new people. And you want to know what you're doing to them, you don't want to sort of make, a new person, who would have thought, new person is here, what will we do with new person? And we must have a meeting to decide this, that is not the time, you want to be on the ground, mobilised, working it out very accurately. When you're recruiting into particularly these core groups, make sure you're really careful on people who are just waiting to bail out of the mother church because they're disgruntled. Because if they're disgruntled there, they'll be disgruntled with you. They'll have an agenda for the perfect church that they really were looking for. You won't be it, and you'll just be putting out bushfires, right? You want to be selective on who gets onto this team. And if you're a mother church pastor, be really careful who you send, right? It would be tempting to send some people, right? This will be a marvellous journey for you to go on, a long way away from this church, Resist that temptation and protect your church planter and the planting team, right? Don't do it otherwise. Now, let me just, one brief comment on question, venue, then I'll hand over to Ben. Venue is really critical. It's more critical than what I thought it was. I'm not an aesthetic sort of person. I don't care. I could work in if I had a desk in a box without a window, it wouldn't worry me, And I think, why can't people do church that way? But we're all wired differently. The venue needs to work, but also you need the venue to gather momentum to plant, right? We're going to plant a church in this rough geographic proximity and you will love it, right? 80% of the people in the room are going, get back to me when you know where we're going to meet. And then I know it's true. Because some love the vision. I don't care where you do it, I'm there, because I just love the idea of something new, But the bulk of people, are kind of aesthetic. They need to be able to touch what you're doing in order to get on board. And once they can identify a location, even though it's not that critical, they'll have a sense of what it's going to be. Right, so don't underestimate the need for venue, particularly in a group like this, where we'll be primarily a group of vision-driven people. So concept will drive us less than location in some ways, okay? Yep.
We face a political crisis in LA with getting pushed out of schools and therefore going from not just necessarily having smaller 200 but going to bigger congregations with affordability and that type of thing. Is that coming into your process with political politics?
Yeah, the whole question of venue, I think, is getting on the agenda. We're trying to plant one next year. The planter has sussed out 26 venues to date in this location. Right? And we're thinking we need probably to articulate a better way through this. We have rented venues the whole way along. Community halls, schools, RSLs. We're starting to think that one through, particularly in the sort of climate we're in as well. Yep, thanks, mate.
Okay, some more data. This goes back to answering the question of how many people we start with. So I'll just quickly explain the graphs to you. So these are our church plants. They're not in order of time. They're just in order of core team, starter team size. So these first 4 here came from Trinity City, the main larger church, and then these 3 at the end of the granddaughter, great-granddaughter plants. So the blue line is the starter team, so the planter, the core group, plus others from the mother church that joined. And then these green lines indicate the average attendance at 12 months after the church has started. So some, I suppose, there's been plenty of research into the correlation between your starter team size and the overall size of the church. So groups like Lifeway have done a fair bit of research into that. I think the Sydney Anglican, there's a report by Anglicare into the correlations there as well. So 2 key takeaways from this information. Yes, there's definitely a correlation, as you can see there, between the starting size and the overall size of the church. That's a fact that we observe. The second one, Paul kind of hit on it before. You have to be prepared for new people in year 1. Every one of our churches has significantly grown within the 12 months after they've started. So that means you've got a lot of new people coming. So things like your welcoming and integration course, your evangelism course, your membership course, got to have that all squared away up front. I suppose another interesting stat is, out of all these years, so we've been church planting since 2001, we've never had a service on a Sunday that has been less than the starter team. So every time we've planted a church, every service from then on has been larger than the starter team.
Do we have any other comparable data to this? Because for a lot of people starting out planting, they're going to just start small, maybe go with 30, that's the ideal number.
Yeah, sure. Bigger, yeah.
But you guys, I know that ran through NBN, and it's all
Yeah, so Lifeway, so if you speak to Scott, we'll have a copy of the Lifeway research, which was done particularly for Australian churches, that does articulate the correlation between starter team size and overall size. There's an Anglicare report into Sydney Anglican church planting as well, which does have a little bit of information on it. So.
Kind of noticing that as we're moving to the right,
Yep.
less growth each time. Is
Yep.
it like you pick the very best places
Right.
initially and
So, so they're not chronological. I've ordered those in size of the starter team. So if I jumbled up the order, you wouldn't see that trend.
That's so unique with the starter team memberships, and it's got sort of not in this month will become the core team or the starter team. Particularly about to feel around that, having put about people who are all groups.
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to answer that. Someone like Mike or Paul might be able to answer that. But I think it's an overall long-term process that you go through, getting to know people and everything. It's not just tick and flick and you're on the team. You want to add anything to that, Mike? Or
We just started saying, if you articulate very clearly what we're on about, what we're going to do, we're not going to apologise for that. We want to come on board and be part of that. If you establish that well, if you have people to start, and I don't think we've got that, we're coming back. So we maybe had 2 people like that, and they were able to say, okay, we'll come, because we know what's wrong about them, and it's been fine.
Yep. So probably the takeaway from this is there's no ideal starter team size. You see we've planted churches with 35, we've planted churches with 135. I think the key point is you don't want to be fighting for survival from day one. So Paul kind of articulated that before. You want to be able to exist when you first start. Yeah. Okay, I'll move on just because we're running out of time really quickly. Detailed planning, the nuts and bolts activities. So the engineers in the room will be happy. There's a Gantt chart up there with milestones, a bit of Monte Carlo analysis, whatever you want to add to it. Probably the key point around this, and Mike really helpfully reminded me of this, is don't underestimate the usefulness of this tool as a way of communicating to your core team about what you're doing and all the tasks that need to be there. Probably the more successful church plants I've seen, it's not just the daughter church that does this, but the mother church does it as well. They use the activity, they use the process of change to revision and gain momentum of their existence. So that's the concept behind the goers and the growers. And then do whatever you can in the lead up to planting, making the most of big moments. So be that soft launches, weekends away, whatever excuse you can get to talk about church planting, that's going to be beneficial. We're into launching. Lots to be said about this. Obviously you try and make as big a splash as you can on day one. Planning for the first 100 days, making sure before you actually get into the chaos of trying to run a church week to week that you've got a plan of what you're going to do for the first 100 days. One thing I've observed in looking at the data, our churches that tend to grow do a really good job of having big Sundays. Very rarely, if they have a big Sunday, do they drop back lower than they were before the big Sunday. So a lot of our churches use that idea of whether it's a baptism, whether it's a community event or something like that, just to gain momentum as you launch in the first year. Okay, I'll keep moving. Finally, evaluation. So if you want to plant a church again, it's really important that you go back and look at what you did. So the missional plans, the things we said at the beginning, great idea to go back to that and check whether you've achieved what you kind of set out to achieve. What went well, what have you been surprised by, what have you dropped the ball on, what lessons have been learned. And I think it's important to do that within a timely fashion. So probably 12 months after you've launched is a great time to sit down with your leadership team or whatever and actually go through that process rigorously. You'll be much better for it a couple of years down the track if you church plant again. Okay. Paul.
Just wrapping up a few points, then we'll just open it up for more questions. Thinking through how to, like in reverse, if you want to sabotage a church plant as a mother church, here are some good ideas. Be unconvinced about the need for more churches and don't talk about the lost. That is, just make it into pragmatic plans, but be reserved about those pragmatic plans, okay? Keep the vision to yourself and maybe one other staff member. Don't tell anyone what you're doing. Let them find out by accident. Be nervous and over-controlling about the mother church. Make sure you keep hold of the very best people, only let a few people go, and that way you are low risk on the mother church, but you guarantee the failure of the daughter church. Absolutely, okay? Don't discuss clarity of relationships between senior pastor and planter. Just be friends and hope it works out. Model details, don't worry about that, it'll all be fine. Authority, we're friends, it'll all work out, no difficulty. Funding, look, you know, I take you out for coffee, you take me for, not a problem, you know. Those sort of issues, legals, all that sort of stuff. If you want to have troubles, don't worry about any of this, right? Because that'll guarantee that you have those sort of troubles. From a daughter church perspective, don't worry about the mission field, just rush the process of getting going, no matter where you are, and you're likely to have major problems. Don't resource adequately. That is, if you start on the smell of an oily rag, that's probably the way it will end as well. I've already said the launch quickly rather than thoughtfully. The gap between idea to launch in Australia, way too short in most instances. Got to spend more time doing the prayerful work, building the team, clarifying what we're doing and why we're doing it, gathering the resources and building momentum, doing the mission work before you actually launch, okay? We need to be doing that sort of stuff better. And then if you're a daughter church, here's a really good way to irritate the senior pastor, okay? Act like a teenager and crave independence as much as you can, right? I've always responded well to my children doing that, and that is, you are looking for partnership. And the temptation when you plant as a daughter church planter, I should look over here, these guys, is that you want to do it yourself and put your own mark on things and that sort of thing. And there's a good aspect to that. But parents love to hear back from their kids and love the ongoing relationship. And you, if you do it well, feed the mother church so they'll line up and do it again. And they're encouraged by the fact that they've done it, which will spur their evangelism. There needs to be good interactive relationship as you do it. Even if your mother-daughter model is more an independent model, keep the relationships going because we're kingdom people doing the same stuff together. Okay, so keep operating those sort of ways. So there's just some negative warning aspects on what we've covered. We haven't got much time. We've got a few minutes for a few questions though, and then we'll launch for lunch. Yep. And
You said at the beginning about the 3 times the amount of time to give generalisations about concept to...
Yep. Okay, so I can tell you what we generally do. So we would, the idea was we went and found Mike and recruited Mike on board. That was sort of year 0. He started year 1. The idea was that he would work in a daughter church for 2 years, 1 year getting really embedded in the church, and then 2nd year building the plan to plant in the 3rd year. Okay, so that gives you some idea of the time frame that we operate with. What we're trying to do is bring planters on board to build churches, work with people, take teams out to plant a new church. That's our mother-daughter sort of model. Now, that timeline didn't quite work out because there was a change of senior pastor, but that was the sort of plan for the process, and that gives you some idea. Okay, the recruitment, year 0, year 1, get embedded, do ministry in the mother church, daughter church who plants a granddaughter. Year 2 is the year where you start gathering the team. You've probably got an idea who you want and an idea where you want to go. But the 2nd year on the staff team is the time when we've done a lot of the planning, preparing, building of the team, and then 3rd year is the year when we've launched, roughly. Yep.
Do you have a formal covenant where you get advances agreed to put the money back in the pot when it provides?
Yeah, we've been making this up a bit as we go along. So currently each of our churches are contributing towards a cost for the network and contributing to a fund to plant other churches. Okay, so we're always trying to get our churches to have that sense of lifted vision for what we're doing as a network and therefore what we're doing kingdom-wise. I think that is the advantage of a network hanging together because we're always part of a group that are trying to do things beyond our church. Now that's a natural kingdom thing that every church has, but a network provides a sort of a closer framework that drives some of that very specific activity for church planning. So it works sort of that way. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
As you grow, do you continue to get together as a staff, as in try to get everyone together?
these days we try and get all the staff from the whole network together about once a term, and we normally have a training event that we run for input. So that includes not just senior pastors but the whole group, and part of that is to have that collective sense of what we're on about together when we do that. So it's major. Those sort of things I reckon you invent as you go along a bit, depending on size and the scattered nature of who you are, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Do you have statistics on where people have come from? You mentioned this morning that church growth in Australia is fairly minimal. How many people are coming out of some language communities? How many people coming from anti-Christian backgrounds? Do you have that sort of data?
Yeah, probably not as precisely as we should. So we know we're hardly getting any people coming from Anglican backgrounds. So that reflects the nature of the city that we're in. So we have, so it breaks up into three groups. There's a de-churched group, there's a never-churched group, and then there's a transfer group. The proportions vary for each of our plants, depending on where they're located, the sort of evangelistic edge they've got. There's a significant number of de-churched. We think of people who've been out of church for 5 years as that sort of group. There's a growing number of church people. So the mother church, for example, health issue. Last month in our mother church in the city, there are 8 people we know got converted in that month. So probably maybe double that became Christians, I would say, in the city in that time. So we're encouraged by that. That's a health indicator that's rising. They're not de-churched, and that's a thing we're seeing around our network. The other thing is, because of the stats that Ben was showing up before, the population, all of us are aware of the movement of population being phenomenal in Australia. And so you've always got people moving around, and the most common time when church people become de-churched people is when they move house. And so that transfer factor is something all churches should have on their radar, because they should be recruiting transfer church people as they move housing in a location. We're not very good at that, I don't think. Yeah. Yep.
How do you feel about people who don't necessarily do high school transfer or part of another church with a longer church?
Yep.
Do you encourage that case by case?
Sorry, so the question is, how do we feel about people within our network moving from church to church? Sorry. Okay, yeah, sure. So people who are in other churches who want to get on board with what we're doing. Yeah. In some cases, I applaud it because they've been faithfully in a church that's then lost its way in terms of not preaching the gospel for lots of years. And they say, okay, you guys are starting up something to reach people, I'm going to get on board with that. If it's someone moving from a church because they're disgruntled, I want to check that out, and work out why they're wanting to move, because there might be good reasons or there might not be. They may just be a variation of your disgruntled people that want to move into a church planting situation, and normally people who make that, or is there a church that's imploding in the area and a whole lot of people are vacating, and if they vacate, will they vacate from you in due course? It varies a bit, actually. Yeah, we're getting close to the end of time, but I'll take 2 last questions. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're still working that one out. So we're in 2 regional locations now in South Australia, Mount Barker and Victor Harbour. Victor Harbour in particular is very much a country town. And I think we're still making the transfer from being city, slightly attractional to embedded in country communities. Now, some of that is, we may not know yet, because maybe you've got to be there for a decade until people think you're starting to become less than a non-local, like you are local, so I reckon we're still working that one out, to be quite honest. Yeah, sorry, there's one last question over here.
So as a mother church, what are some of the biggest challenges or difficulties you have with the older churches in your list of countries? I've heard most of it really good.
Yeah.
So the problem was some stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so the major challenges, I think, for the big city mother church in sending people, the first time we did it, we weren't particularly healthy. So when Ben drew that graph, plant when you're healthy, right? We planted this side of the curve. So what it did initially was it exacerbated our curve decline, right, over here, because we stripped out a whole lot of our great people at a time where we were a bit lethargic as a church. And so it steepled downwards, and we had to, address that decline. Now, I knew that was the case, but it was still a bit of a roller coaster ride at that point to make sure we came out of it healthier, So there's always that sort of health assessment question. In terms of relationship with daughter churches, I think it is the how do you create enough space so they can do their thing in their local area when parents can often, you talk about helicopter parents in Australia. Mother churches can be helicopter mothers, hovering around, watch out, and most church planners don't really like that much. So there's that sense of having right relationship, mutual encouragement, so there's partnership. So we've worked hard on a flat sort of model. Rather than a mother church with daughter churches, the mother church is now a daughter church. Okay, it's in that mix along there. It's still larger, but that sort of thing. And I think initially we didn't have clarity around financials, accountabilities, all those sort of things. And that's what got us into trouble, to be quite honest, yeah. Really happy to help out. The data that Ben put up, hopefully will be on the web so you can download that. But if you do want more information, ask Ben. He'd be happy to help you. That is, he'll reply to your emails. And that'd be a good thing. Or seriously though, if we can help you as you think through what you're trying to do, we'd love to do it. We're still making it up as we go along. That's what's happening, so it helps us to interact and think through different situations. But if there's stuff we've done that's useful, it's terrific. We're going to have lunch. Why don't I pray for us as we go and have lunch, eh? Yeah. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your wonderful grace and mercy towards us in the Lord Jesus. Father, we ask that you'll help us as we engage in gospel work to keep our mind on both your glory and honour, and therefore people who aren't yet in relationship with you, who are living in rebellion against you. And Father, we ask that as we've reflected on the whole nature of starting new ministries and congregations to reach out, that you and your kindness will help us to do that well, to do that with good heart, fixed on you, not growing our own kingdoms, but rather being about your glory and honour and kingdom. Father, we just ask that you'll strengthen and enable us for that task. Father, thanks for this time of fellowship we have here at the Multiply Conference. We thank you for great food and the opportunity to share it together, the fellowship we enjoy with one another. And so we commend ourselves to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, guys.